Questions, discussion. We have 20 minutes, 15 minutes. Any questions for Jim or Sherry?
So it seems...
Sorry, can I ask you to say your name and where you're from?
Sure. So my name is Jamie. I'm a student at the University of Toronto. I'm just curious, both of you touched on how deeply personal relationships that you built with various indigenous communities that you've expanded in over time. And historically, it seems like the breakdown of those personal relationships have occurred when one or more parties have either died or moved away. And like in a modern context, I see a parallel when one of the parties involved retires. And so I'm wondering what you would recommend as far as establishing these relationships cross-generationally. That's a good word, but you know what I mean. And if there are some sort of like embedded succession strategies that operate on these extended time frames.
Do you have some thoughts?
Well, I can just share I think that's an excellent question because I've seen it happen in the Joint Stewardship Board. Some of that work, that gentleman I had with Chulo Wampum, he started that work. I took it on. I went to take another position. He came back. He's since taken another position. And now that work has stopped because we just can't find a person to get in there to move this towards the direction it's almost starting over. And what we failed to do within that is develop different circles of sort of like consultation and collaboration circles to be at those meetings. It stayed very high level. And I would have recommended now, and I've encouraged them to bring in, like we talked about bringing the youth in. We didn't bring the youth in enough and bring people in to get them on board. So to almost go back to the protocols we use within our community, we should involve the clan mothers and the chiefs. So using the community processes within it and getting the community on board. Because we had one or two champions. And I think you're asking like, what happens when some of those champions leave, and relationships are hard to rebuild. So there's ways of embedding in the process by working with the schools. When the first project I worked on, the Eagles Cry, the mapping part, we went into the schools, each of the schools on the reserve, we gave them copies of it. The students were learning it. They still talk about it. Now technology's moved on, they don't need it, but it was a trigger point. People go, oh yeah, the Eagles Cry, we use that. So engaging within the processes within the communities to say, who do we engage in setting up different circles and tables? That's one way that I think. We talk about engaging the youth, but that's what it means. It's often, what does that mean, engage the youth? We get out to the schools, get them involved, and then have them a part of those decision makings because they'll be the ones keeping that going. And they will, especially I know with this project too, we're trying to engage Gowanio, the immersion school, where the students are all speaking languages that let them take the leadership and then they'll take it on. So it's about empowering the communities, developing those processes and then transferring that so it's not on the researcher. The researcher should be doing this. I truly feel I'm just a facilitator in there. Right now I'm hiring community researchers in Chippewa of the Thames. I'll be training them. They'll go and collect the data. They're getting the documents for me. They'll learn how to analyze it. Because if I leave, it's no good if they don't have that capacity as well. So that's sort of random things that just came to mind on that. Hopefully that helped a bit. But happy to talk with you more, like one-on-one, if there's specifics. You'd probably work with Mississauga as a New Credit First Nation in that too.
And I agree with what Sherry said, is that what we're finding is with many of the communities we work with, they're aware of the need to bring younger people into the process from their perspective. But what I can talk about is from our perspective at HTFC, because one of the characteristics of our firm is we have relationships with some communities, Indigenous communities, that go for decades. And we're continuing to work. And so there's a transition there where the... Okay. I love it. And so you could adopt a similar approach here. You need to have like the senior scholar, and then you need to have the next generations that follows. So you carry on. If I can talk about Pimachikamak or Cross Lake as a community we've worked with for 4 decades, the first leader from our firm who went in there to lead projects was David Whitty. Well, David was my advisor when I was here at the University of Manitoba, and then my boss, and then my partner. and Heather Krams here as well. And then eventually, Dave left and I took over at the lead. And then over the passage of time, Tim Hogan, who's also a graduate of this program, came in and he was leading it. And we have people like Trent Workman, who's in the room today, who's a graduate of the program, who's working at Cross Lake. So for the firm, we have multiple generations on our side as well that have the continuity of relationship. So it's, that's a success. It requires that on both sides.
Does that
There's
help?
a question over here.
I wanted to ask about mapping specifically, because during your discussions yesterday, there was a lot of discussion, and I guess Marcy and I, both in our faculty, sorry, I don't listen to and so I guess we were finding mapping as sort of a way into some of these topics with the thought that by being able to sort of visually represent some of the issues would kind of open up a discussion and educate, and then the layering that you can do of history over time on those maps then really allows those stories to be told. But I guess, I mean, and Jim, I know you've done work in this realm as well, in terms of the mapping, and you sort of alluded to potential limitations of that, and I guess it sort of also feels a bit like, well then what, you know? And I guess I'd say within our program, we're feeling like we're just sort of embarking on these kind of relationships and these types of ideas. So I'm wondering if you can speak to maybe the successes and failures that you've had in your mapping, and then the potentials for moving beyond that toward action.
So, Dr. Sherry?
I can.
I'll just say a few words, and I'm going to have to say a few words because I could go on at length. But I made the comment that mapping is a very powerful tool and has a strategic value. But it also, what I've begun to learn from some of the work we've done is that it's a colonial approach to landscape analysis. Satellite imagery and scaled maps and so on and so forth. But the other thing we've learned by doing some mapping is you begin to understand the representation, as you say, of values or worldviews spatially, and then to examine that in relation to a Canadian map or a global map or whatever, which really begins to reveal different ways of seeing and knowing. So it's a very, very powerful tool. The thing that's interesting is just to be very aware of how the technology limits us as well as creates opportunity, and how it can distort the view and actually enhance the view. So you just have to be aware of that.
Yes, I would, it must be easy.
You can't stand for the speaker. Standing for the speaker's mic.
When I first thought that came to me when mapping, I just thought, two things. I just thought of power and knowledge, and who holds the power and who has the knowledge, holds the information. So mapping and I just I always look at things with so many lenses. My first lens is going back to when working with communities where they had no knowledge at all. They had no maps, they had no spatial representation, they had no information management system. So we started just plain mapping. And it was so powerful for the community. We're just seeing things into a spatial information. It was more from the spatial information system, not just seeing the map, but what can we tie to that, and how can we make those spatial correlations, and how can we use this as a registry system for our membership? How can we map our houses, and how do we know where the septic beds are to the houses? So it started being an internal tool on that scale, and then we went to a watershed scale where they wanted to do values mapping. We were working with the Ministry of Natural Resources, and we were doing, that was part of the land claim too. We funded part of the land claim through doing local mapping to support claim development. But part of that was doing values mapping that the MNR wanted at that time, but the community was so afraid of sharing those values. So we ended up doing the mapping and teaching the team to go and collect the data and identify those spots, but they buffered them. They put protective measures on them, and then rather than give that map and that data over, they controlled it. So when decisions were making or new permits were going to be issued, the MNR would contact the community and say, and this is the Wampate First Nation, their GIS now has gone full blown, and they're doing forestry. We did one on minerals, this wild minerals application. So they're using it because they hold that knowledge. So there's tremendous use, but there's tremendous, because what also came to mind when I was teaching Navy GIS like 15 years ago, the map, I remember the book we used, How to Lie with Maps. And it was just about cartography and ways, and as we know, how spatially represented and how we can change, and how maps can be such a powerful tool, just even colors and visualizations, and so recognizing the power of that Then I also thought of what my students and I talk about now, they're starting to discover, because you know what, planning and this land delineation, it's a colonial tool. It's colonization over again. How do we navigate that? And I'd say often the claims, the specific claims process and comprehensive claims process in Canada that requires communities to delineate their territory and lands. We never had lands that were delineated to that degree. It can cause a lot of conflict once you define as to confine. So there's that side too. So it's good that you see that and know that. And I don't know if there's any right answer for you to to make help the community be aware of the limitations of the risks they're facing, and then really and I hold strong in OCAP, ownership, control, access, and possession for community, that what is generated out of that goes to the community, and then it's up for them to decide. Because we know they're powerful tools. We know they're so useful, but often in the wrong hands, and maps have been so destructive to communities, because it's not just a map, but it's the process of what that map has generated. So there's a good, bad, it depends on what lens you put on, but I think kudos for you for thinking about that and incorporating those thoughts into it. And I think as researchers, it's our job, whether Indigenous or not, to bring those risks forward to communities. And if we see it, they need to know that. There's a risk here. Do we want to move ahead with that? Or here's a way to protect that. Here's strategies we can use. I don't want to be the ones giving knowledge away or something that, I can tell you examples where we map medicine plants and put it on a map, and the medicine plants were all taken away. And now the women, when we map them, plus they say they're spiritual, they might not be there now, because now once we map them, people are going to say we're going to protect that, but not over there. And medicines don't stay in one spot, as the traditional medicine ladies will tell me. But I don't know if that's helpful. So answer.
Any other questions?
I'm Susan Harrington from UBC out in Vancouver. And we had an interesting situation where we've had our students work with Indigenous communities in the city of Vancouver. And once we start working with them, we realize that like 70% of them are from the prairies. And so it's been interesting to try to, I just wonder if you have any advice, Sherry, or either one of you. But so there was a big discussion, start thinking about what their practices were. And there's a big tension between the history in the city of Vancouver, which is anthropology, of using sort of expressions and artworks and architectures and landscapes of an Indigenous group that was miles and miles away.
Yeah. Should you have any comments?
Sure.
I do feel like I don't.
Do I have to stand back here? I got to stand somewhere where I don't hoot. That's a really good question, and I think it shows the maturity or the complexity of the question, because it tends to be, I love to say, and this would be the sort of debate I get into with Heather Cram and Jeff Frank, is because it's both very simple and very complex at the same time. And that the thing that's interesting is that we tend to think of things in a simplistic way, that people did this and they lived here and they had this kind of approach, but that we learn. My fingers are touching. Okay. I better do all the talking from now on. And so it seems to me that it begs the question, and the sort of questions you're asking is that who represents and what is appropriate representation. And I think that, again, if we go, without sort of sounding like a broken record, if you go and do some more reading of what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has to say, they're very forward-thinking, and that they're sort of saying, well, the past is the past, we have to learn the past, but we're moving forward together. So it does seem to me there has to be open dialogue and it has to be inclusive. Because in the same way that there would be, it's not surprising that there are Indigenous people being mobile in Canada the same way that we have people from various regions. So what is the appropriate way to represent? And what are we trying to do? And why are we trying to represent anyway? What is the purpose and intent? So I think you can, you go in with that kind of an understanding, you can have an open discussion. And obviously, just trying to sort of say, we're taking, if it was in a particular instance that made sense to use some kind of prairie aesthetic in Vancouver, whether it be an Indigenous prairie aesthetic or a non-Indigenous aesthetic, you'd have to think that through and understand why it is. So I think it's, to that extent, it's not do different? I mean, it's not easy, and it's not superficial, but I think that's the problem. If it is easy and superficial, we usually end up with things that are unsuccessful.
Yeah. I don't know, I was just thinking, I haven't been in that situation. I don't do design work per se, I do more of the collaboration, so I'd be curious to see who the actors are, and where they're coming from. I'd likely put together a panel of people who just say sharing circle, talking circle, and try to sort of flesh out what are the real issues. And I don't know enough of the context. It's an urban Aboriginal group that's trying to, or is it across the whole city?
It was a
strategy?
studio site for all our thesis projects one year, and
Yes.
the students were trying to find design projects
Yes.
in this area of Vancouver that was, had a huge, very large conservation portion in it, which is just great. And we just were shocked when we found that out, and we were like, okay, we have to rethink.
Yes, yes.
That's how we were gonna,
Yes. And maybe working, I know in Southern Ontario we have a friendship center, so working with the friendship centers too, because they have those relationships. Often it's working through a median, those that have those relationships with all the different organizations, to bring them together too to the table, because then they get an opportunity to engage in that discussion and sort of be a mediator, intermediaries between that to understand. But yeah, that would be a very context-specific one where I wouldn't know. I see similar within Toronto and Southern Ontario area between the Haudenosaunee and Mississauga's New Credit. Mississauga, it's contested land, a treaty, Mississauga New Credit Treaty hasn't been settled. From Mississauga's point of view, the Haudenosaunee's point of view is that it was treaty land from 1701, well before, and Mississauga will come, those are treaty lands. So part of it is trying to come up with ways of saying, we've all had a relationship on that land, and how do we represent that relationship to be respectful for all Indigenous peoples? But it's easier said than done, that's still very principle-based.